Hey guys, and welcome to part 2 of the Dark Souls and Unity tutorial series. I ask if you're checking it again, please don't forget to drop a like as it does help my series out a bunch. Thanks. Enjoy the episode. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is right click, create empty. We're going to call this our camera holder. And then we're going to right click under this and create an empty. And we're going to call that our camera pivot. And then finally, we'll drag the main camera under the camera pivot. Okay, next we're going to right click here and create script, and we're going to call that script camera handler. So let's open that script up and go on into Visual Studio. Alright, let's start out by removing the update and the start method as we will not need them. Next we'll put in our namespace, mine is SG. And before we actually start getting into the functionality of the script, we're going to insert all the variables needed. So our first one will be a public transform, target transform, then another public transform, camera transform, then another public transform, camera pivot transform, and then a private transform of my transform. Next, a private vector 3. We're going to call this camera transform position because it's the vector 3 position of the camera. Next, private layer mask. Ignore layers. Now don't think too much about this one right now because this is used for the camera's collision later on, so right now it's not too important. Next, we're going to create a camera handler singleton. And then a public float look speed. Next, a public float follow speed, then a public float pivot speed, a private float default position, a private float look angle, a private float pivot angle, a public float minimum pivot, which we're going to set at -35, a public float maximum pivot, which we're going to set at 35. Alright, so let's just take a moment to look at the variables we have here now. So our first one is a public transform of a target transform. That is the target transform that the camera will eventually go to. Then we have a public transform of the camera transform. That is the transform of our actual camera. And then we have the transform of the camera's pivot. The pivot is how the camera is going to turn on a swivel. It's how we're going to make the camera rotate. It's going to rotate around the pivot. Okay, then we have a private transform of my transform, that's just the transform of this game object, and then we have a vector 3 camera transform position. And these are the most important variables you need to look at now. The vector 3 obviously just being a vector position of the camera's transform. Of course, this will make a lot more sense when you actually see the functionality, so let's begin. Alright, first off in the functionality, we're going to start by making an awake method. And we're going to start first by saying the singleton equals this. Next, we're going to say my transform equals transform. And that basically just means that the my transform variable is equal to the transform of this game object. Default position is going to equal camera transform dot local position dot z. It's very important to use local position and not position. Ignore layers. And don't mind this part, we're just going to ignore the layers I'm listing here in the video, but basically on the next lesson we're doing a video on how the camera collides with objects in the environment, and we're going to use this to make it ignore some of the layers for collision. So this is not too important right now, but just take note of it. I'm just adding in this video because it will be used directly in the next lesson. Alright, we're going to save that. Next we're going to go to our player, and we're going to basically create a new layer and call that layer the controller. I'm going to place mine on layer 10. And we're just going to assign that controller layer to the player's game object. Excellent. Now we're going to go back into the script. Okay, next we're going to do a public void follow target. We're going to pass the delta as a float. So we're going to write vector 3 target position equals vector 3 dot lerp between my transform dot position and target transform dot position. And by the delta divided by follow speed. Next, we're going to write my transform dot position equals target position. So this function is pretty straightforward. Basically, all we have here is a variable of a vector 3 called target position, and that's going to equal a lerp between my transform dot position and target transform dot position. And then my transform dot position will equal target position. And since this function will be used on update, meaning it will be called every frame, this is just going to cause the camera to follow our target transform dot position, which is going to be our player. So in case you haven't figured it out yet, our target transform variable is going to just be our player's transform. Okay, next let's make a function to handle the rotations of the camera. So we're going to do public void handle camera rotation, and we're going to pass a float delta and the float for our mouse input x and our mouse input y. Then we're going to do look angle plus equals brackets move x input times look speed and brackets divide by the delta. Then we're going to do pivot angle minus equals brackets mouse y input times pivot speed brackets divided by the delta. Then we're going to do pivot angle equals mathf.clamp, and we're going to clamp that between the pivot angle and the minimum and maximum pivot variables. This basically will allow the camera to be stuck between 2 points of pivot, so it can't go any lower or higher than the angles we have established. Next, we're going to do vector 3 rotation equals vector 3.0. Rotation.y is going to equal our look angle. Then we're going to do quaternion target rotation equals quaternion.euler brackets our rotation variable. Then we'll do my transform.rotation equals target rotation. Rotation equals vector 3.0. Rotation.x equals pivot angle. Target rotation equals quaternion.euler and then brackets our rotation. And finally, camera pivot transform dot local rotation equals target rotation. Alright, great. We have our follow target method. So basically now the camera will follow our target, which is our player when we assign it. And we have our handle camera rotation method. So now the camera will rotate with the values of mouse X and mouse Y or a joystick. Now all that's left to do is call these methods on an update method. So let's go over to our input handler. And first we're going to add a variable, camera handler. So let's create an awake method. And we're going to say on awake, we're going to say camera handler equals camera handler.singleton. Then we're going to create a fixed update method. We're just going to say delta float delta equals time.fixed delta time. So we're going to say if camera handler does not equal null, then we're going to open up some brackets here, and then we're going to call our camera handler dot follow target. We're going to pass the delta. Then we're going to call our camera handler dot handle camera rotation, and we're going to pass the delta and the mouse X and mouse Y variables. Alright, let's save the script and jump in game and see how that works. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is click on the camera holder game object, and we're going to add our camera handler script to that. And then we're going to drag the player into our target transform variable in the inspector, and that will make the camera follow the player's transform. Next, we're going to drag the main camera into the camera transform, and the camera pivot into the camera pivot transform. Alright, I'm going to go to the main camera now and adjust the view. I'm going to bring that camera a little bit closer to our player. Remember, when adjusting the camera's view, you actually want to click on the main camera and not the camera holder or the camera pivot game object. I repeat again, to adjust the camera's view, use the main camera. I'm going to pull that in real close to the player there. Let's give that a try. Awesome, so it works, but you see here we have a problem. The camera will not stop spinning. Okay, that is a problem, isn't it? Our player is also able to walk off of the ground now, so If you think you know what's wrong, I want you to go ahead and pause the video and give it a try and see if you can fix it. Now I'm going to correct these bugs in just a moment, but I encourage you to pause the video and see if you can find a solution to the second one. Why is our player able to walk off of the ground like that? I'll give you a hint. It's something we forgot to place into our player locomotion script. It has to do with the y-axis. Alright, I hope that you at least tried that second bug on your own. Don't be afraid to fail. Problem solving is a very, very nice skill to have as a programmer, and you learn by messing up and trying again. So that first bug, we're going to click on our player controls, and we're going to go to the camera. So you see here, our action type was on button. We actually put it on pass-through and set it to vector 2. And that's it. It fixed the problem. The problem was not with our script, it was with our inputs. So now it should work as intended. Now, as for our player walking off of the ground, as you can see, the camera works fine, not spinning infinitely anymore. But if we whirl around, we are actually able to still come off the ground. So, that is still a problem. So let's go fix that. So we're actually going to go to our player locomotion script. Very simple here. We're going to go into our void update, and right here where we write down the functionality of how we move, we're going to put in move direction .y equals 0. Very simple, basically just freezing the movement and not allowing anything on the y-axis so you can't go up or down. Very, very straightforward, and that's really all there is to it. And now if we check in game here, as you can see, we are able to move around freely without levitating off of the ground. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson, in which we'll cover camera collision. Don't forget to check me out on Patreon if you like my videos and show me some support, and please drop a like on the video. It is greatly appreciated. Gets the video around. I'll see you in the next one. Bugs. Okay, so console error. This one may come up if you're new to using the Unity's input system, or if you're just new to Unity in general. After you make the correction on our camera, changing it to a vector 2 instead of a button, you may get a bunch of these console errors. And basically, it's giving you this error because if you're like me and you've moved your player controls into the scripts folder, it will create another one after you've saved the changes made with the inputs. So just delete the old one and you're good to go. Camera won't follow player. So let's say you come back into the game and you start it up only to find that your camera will not follow your player. Well, this is easily fixed by going to the camera holder and removing the camera handler script and then re-adding it. Just insert the target transform, camera transform, and camera pivot transform variables as normal and you're good to go.